Imagine someone being invited to the most luxurious place, not to be welcomed, not to be respected, but to be humiliated in front of the most powerful figures in the underworld. That's exactly what happened to Isabel. Belle worked as a server at a high-end restaurant in Seattle. She carried plates, cleared tables, bowed her head before mafia bosses, and stayed silent, always. Most people didn't see her. To them, she was only a shadow moving between expensive suits and $1,000 bottles of wine. Some people passed by her as if she were part of the wall. Even worse, as if she didn't exist at all. So when the invitation arrived, it felt strange, almost like a dream. It was for the wedding of Veronica Sterling, the cherished daughter of the most powerful mafia boss on the West Coast, the most arrogant and ruthless woman Belle had ever met in her life, the woman who'd turned Belle's life into hell for so many years, the woman who'd never missed a single chance to humiliate her in front of a crowd. But what Belle didn't know was that the invitation carried poison. It wasn't a gift. It wasn't kindness. It was a trap already set, a performance where Belle had been chosen as the fool, a public execution of her dignity in front of hundreds of powerful people. But there was one thing Veronica didn't know. There was one thing the entire underworld had forgotten long ago. Because the woman they planned to turn into a joke, the serving girl they treated like trash, had once been the princess of the most formidable mafia empire on the West Coast, the only daughter of the gentleman, a legendary boss whose name had once made the entire underworld bow in respect. And there was a man who recognized her, Julian Blackwood, the coldest, most dangerous mafia boss, the man who hadn't been able to forget those gray-blue eyes for 6 years. But life always finds a way to twist everything in a direction no one expects, because that night, the woman they thought would become a joke, the woman they were certain would be disgraced, didn't walk in like a servant. She walked in like a queen returning home, a white dress, pure as snow, golden hair, bright as sunlight, and at her throat, the white rose emblem of the Thornwood family. The entire room fell into silence. Champagne glasses froze in midair. Mafia bosses stared with their mouths open, and Veronica, the arrogant bride, turned pale as a corpse. What happened after that? No one could have imagined it. If you love stories about rising again and reclaiming dignity, hit like to support the channel. Share this video with anyone who needs inspiration. And don't forget to subscribe, turn on notifications, so you won't miss the next special stories. Now, let's begin. That night, the Gilded Rose was packed to the edges. Warm gold light spilled from crystal chandeliers and slid over expensive suits and glittering dresses. Laughter and conversation rolled through the room in waves. The scent of costly wine braided itself with luxury perfume, forming an atmosphere Belle had grown far too familiar with over 3 years. She moved between tables like a shadow, a tray of drinks in her hands, her head slightly bowed, her eyes fixed downward. No one noticed her. No one remembered her face. And that was exactly what she wanted, because if they looked closer, if they recognized those gray-blue eyes, everything she'd built over 6 years would collapse. Belle had just set a cocktail down at table 7 when a hand clamped around her wrist. Tight. Painful. She turned. A middle-aged man, his face flushed red from alcohol, stared at her with a cloudy, muddied gaze. "Hey, sweetheart, sit down here and have a drink with me." His breath, thick with whiskey, washed over Belle's face. She tried to pull her hand back, but his grip tightened. "Sir, I'm working," Belle said, her voice steady even as her heart sped up. "Working what? I pay money at this restaurant, and I want you sitting here." He yanked her closer. Belle looked around. No one helped her. The manager was busy entertaining VIP guests. Her coworkers kept their heads down, pretending they didn't see. She understood. In this world, people like her weren't protected. She had to take care of herself. Belle drew in a deep breath, then suddenly twisted her wrist in the opposite direction and slipped free. A simple technique her father had once taught her. From another life, another version of who she used to be. "I'm sorry, sir. I have to go." She said it and walked away fast, before he could react. Her heart still hammered. Her hands still trembled. But her face stayed calm, as if nothing had happened. It was the survival skill she'd learned over the past 6 years. Hide every feeling, become invisible, survive. But tonight, fate didn't let her go. Around 10 o'clock at night, the restaurant doors opened. Veronica Sterling walked in with her friends. As always, She appeared like a queen, a tight red dress, sleek black hair, bright red lips curved into a disdainful smile. The whole restaurant seemed to pause for a beat. Everyone knew who she was, Arthur Sterling's cherished daughter, the woman about to become the wife of a powerful boss. And Belle's nightmare. Veronica took her usual VIP table. Her friends clustered around her, laughing loudly. Then she looked around, searching for someone. Her gaze landed on Belle. The smile on Veronica's mouth widened. "You there, come here." Belle swallowed. She approached the VIP table, her head lowered. "Yes, Miss Sterling. Pour wine for us." Belle took the bottle of red wine and carefully poured into Veronica's glass. Her hand didn't shake. She didn't allow it to shake. "Watch it, you clumsy idiot." Veronica suddenly flicked her hand. The bottle tilted. Red wine spilled in a rush over Belle's shirt, over her white apron, and onto the floor. Veronica's friends burst into laughter. Belle went still. The wine seeped cold through the fabric, ran down her legs. The sharp smell of sour grapes rose into her nose, but she didn't move. She didn't say a word. "Oh, sorry about that." Veronica pretended to be surprised, but her eyes glittered with pleasure. "You've dirtied the floor. Clean it up." Belle stared at the blotch of red spreading across the marble. Then she looked at Veronica. Gray-blue met cold black. For one moment, just one moment, something flashed in Belle's eyes. Something dangerous. Something Veronica didn't recognize. And then it was gone. Belle sank to her knees. She pulled a cloth from her apron pocket and began to wipe the floor. In front of Veronica. In front of her friends. In front of the entire restaurant that was watching. "Look at her. That position suits her so well." One of Veronica's friends giggled. "That's right. On her knees at someone's feet. That's where people like her belong." Belle didn't lift her head. She kept wiping. One streak. Then another. Tears threatened to rise, but she forced them back down. She wouldn't cry. Not in front of them. Never. 30 minutes later, her shift ended. Belle changed in the staff room. Alone. The white shirt still held red stains that wouldn't wash out. She stuffed it into her bag, pulled on an old coat, and left the restaurant through the back door. Seattle at night was cold and unforgiving. Belle walked home to her apartment, a tiny room on the 5th floor of an aging building, the elevator broken long ago. She climbed the stairs, step by step, step by step, her legs heavy as if they were weighed down with lead. Her room was pitch dark. Belle didn't turn on the light. She sat on the narrow bed and looked toward the window. City lights flickered in the distance, like stars she'd never be able to touch. In the darkness, she finally let herself cry. Tears slid silently down her cheeks. No sobbing, no sound, only tears and darkness. This was her life. This was everything she had. A shadow, someone invisible, someone no one remembered. But Belle didn't know that in just a few days, everything would change, because someone had seen her, someone had recognized her, and someone would never forget those gray-blue eyes. 2 days after that night, Julian Blackwood set foot in the Gilded Rose. A glossy black Maybach stopped in front of the restaurant. 2 bodyguards in black suits stepped out first, and only then did he follow. Julian stood over 1 meter 85 centimeters tall, broad-shouldered, solidly built in a perfectly tailored black 3-piece suit. His black hair was slightly wavy, his eyes a dark brown like black coffee, cold and razor-sharp. On his left temple, a faint scar ran down toward his cheekbone, a trace left by a violent past. The moment he walked in, the whole restaurant seemed to fall silent for a heartbeat. No one dared meet his gaze, because everyone knew who Julian Blackwood was. The Mafia boss who controlled all of Nevada and part of California. The kind of man whose name alone could make others tremble. Arthur Sterling was already waiting at the VIP table farther inside. He rose when he saw Julian, wearing that familiar, counterfeit smile. "Julian, I'm glad to see you. Thanks for coming." Julian shook Arthur's hand, his face unreadable. "Get to the point, Sterling. I don't have much time." They sat down. Arthur began talking about the deal, about partnering to expand territory, about figures and profit percentages. Julian listened, nodding now and then, but his eyes weren't fully there. Something in the air of this place made him uneasy. A vague sensation, as if someone were watching him, or as if he were searching for someone he didn't even know he was looking for. Then, she passed by. A server in a black uniform, hair neatly tied back, head lowered, a tray of drinks balanced in her hands. She moved so lightly she made almost no sound, like a shadow slipping between tables. But Julian saw her. He didn't know why his gaze automatically found her among dozens of other servers. She lifted her head for a brief instant as she set a glass of water down at the next table, and Julian saw those eyes. Gray-blue, like the sky before a storm, like the color of the deep sea. His heart felt as if someone had clamped a fist around it. The world around him blurred at the edges. Arthur Sterling's voice turned into a distant, meaningless hum, because he'd seen those eyes before, 6 years ago, the Alliance banquet at Thornwood Manor. Julian had been 30 then, newly inheriting the empire from his father. He'd attended as a guest, wanting to size up Edward Thornwood, the man everyone called the Gentleman. That nickname wasn't because he was weak. It was because he possessed something very few Mafia bosses ever had: honor. Edward Thornwood stood in the center of the great hall, elegant in a white suit, a warm smile resting on his lips. Beside him stood a young woman, around 21 years old, in a shimmering silver dress. Golden blonde hair spilled over her shoulders. Gray-blue eyes burned bright. Her smile was confident. She stood there like a true princess, not arrogant, but not timid either. "This is my daughter, Isabel," Edward said, pride woven into his smile. Julian shook her hand. Her hand was small, but her grip was firm. She looked straight into his eyes, not shrinking away like other women did. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice clear. And for the first time in his life, Julian Blackwood, the coldest Mafia boss of them all, felt his heart beat faster because of a woman. He'd wanted to speak with her longer. He'd wanted to know more about her. But that night, he'd had to leave early for business. And then, only a few months later, the Thornwood family was attacked. Edward died, his wife died, and Isabel, the girl with those gray-blue eyes, was believed to have died as well. Julian looked down at the whiskey in front of him. He'd been furious when he heard the news. Not because he'd lost a potential ally, but because the world had lost someone like her. "Julian, are you listening to me?" Arthur Sterling's voice dragged him back to the present. Julian lifted his head. The server had disappeared behind the kitchen door. "Go on," he said, his voice as cold as ever. But in his mind, the image of those gray-blue eyes kept repeating, again and again. It couldn't be. Isabel Thornwood had died 6 years ago, but those eyes, that weightless way of moving. Julian tightened his grip around the whiskey glass. He needed to know who that girl was. 2 weeks had passed since the night Julian Blackwood appeared at the restaurant. Belle still worked the way she always did, carrying trays, clearing tables, lowering her head, staying silent. She didn't know someone had recognized her. She didn't know those dark brown eyes were still searching for her inside memory. For Belle, each day was simply a fight for survival. Wake up, go to work, endure, go home, sleep, and repeat. But today, that fight was about to take a turn she never saw coming. That afternoon, Veronica Sterling arrived at the restaurant with 5 friends. They'd come to sample the wedding menu, an event the whole city was buzzing about. Arthur Sterling's daughter was going to marry Preston Montgomery, the Mafia boss who controlled the entire South. A political marriage, a powerful alliance, and a lavish celebration everyone wanted an invitation to. Veronica settled into her usual VIP table, wearing a tight pastel pink dress, black hair curled into perfect waves, her finger adorned with an engagement ring, a diamond as big as a pea. She fluttered a fan, laughed with her friends, and every so often pointed at a dish with a disdainful frown. Then her gaze swept across the restaurant and stopped on Belle. The smile on Veronica's lips widened, the kind of smile Belle knew too well, a predator's smile when it sees prey. "You there, the one who's always lurking in the corners. Come here." Belle drew in a long breath, then walked to the VIP table. She stopped 1 step away from Veronica, head slightly bowed, hands clasped together in front of her stomach. "Yes, Miss Sterling." Veronica didn't speak right away. She only looked Belle up and down, her expression contemptuous, as if she were examining an insect. Then, she pulled something from her purse. An invitation. Cream-colored, gold-edged, the letters stamped in gold, shimmering under the light. Veronica set the card on the table, then gave it a light push so it slid toward Belle. But it slid too far and dropped to the floor, right at Belle's feet. Veronica's friends covered their mouths and giggled. "Oh, sorry about that," Veronica said, feigning surprise, though her eyes sparkled with enjoyment. "Pick it up." Belle stared at the invitation on the floor. Then she looked at Veronica. A moment of silence passed. Two women facing each other. One sitting high above, arrogant. One standing below, mute. Then Belle bent down. She picked up the invitation, moving slowly, unhurried. She wouldn't let Veronica see her anger. She wouldn't give her that satisfaction. "Open it," Veronica ordered. Belle opened the card. The gold letters appeared before her eyes. "You are cordially invited to the wedding of Veronica Sterling and Preston Montgomery. Saturday, 7 o'clock in the evening. Sterling Estate. Black tie." Belle read the address again and again. Sterling Estate. Those two words hit her like a knife straight through the chest. Because that place wasn't Sterling Estate. That place was Thornwood Manor, the home her father had built, the garden her mother had planted, rose by rose, the grand hall where she danced a waltz with her father on her 21st birthday, her family's home, the home the Sterling family had stolen after murdering her parents. "Consider this your reward," Veronica's voice sliced through Belle's thoughts. "A reward for all these years of good service. I want you at my wedding." Veronica's friends laughed. "Veronica, you're so kind." "That's right. Letting the servant come to a high society party. So generous." Veronica tilted her head, studying Belle with fake pity. "But do you even have anything to wear? I'm afraid if you show up in that uniform, it'll be a little odd." The laughter grew louder. "Or maybe we should just have her serve tables. That's all she knows how to do anyway." "Great idea." Serving at the wedding of the century, what an honor. Belle stood there with the invitation in her hand. She felt her nails digging deep into her palm, sharp with pain. She felt tears threatening to rise, hot behind her eyelids. But her face didn't change. Her voice stayed calm when she said only 2 words. "Thank you." Veronica's brow tightened slightly, disappointed she didn't get to watch Belle fall apart. Then she shrugged and turned back to her friends. "Don't forget to come. I'm really looking forward to seeing you." Belle lowered her head and walked away. She stepped into the staff room, closed the door, and leaned back against the wall. The invitation was still in her hand. She knew what this was. Not kindness, not an invitation. A trap. Veronica wanted to humiliate her in front of everyone, to turn her into entertainment for the elite, to prove she was nothing but trash, unworthy of stepping into their world. But there was one thing Veronica didn't know. Sterling Estate had once been Belle's home, and maybe, at last, it was time for her to go back. That night, Belle couldn't sleep. She sat on the narrow bed in her pitch-dark apartment, the gold-stamped invitation resting on her lap. Streetlights spilled in through the window, just enough for her to see the words Sterling Estate shimmering as if they were mocking her. She tried not to think about it. She'd tried to treat it like one more meaningless joke from Veronica, but those 2 words kept circling in her mind like a blade drilling deeper into a wound that had never healed. Sterling Estate, Thornwood Manor, her home. Tears began to fall. Belle didn't try to stop them. In the darkness, no one could see her crying. No one knew she was hurting. She could be weak for a moment. Just for a moment. And then the memories crashed over her like floodwater. That night, 6 years ago, Belle was 21, newly graduated from college, asleep in her own room at Thornwood Manor. At midnight, gunshots tore through the quiet. She jolted awake, her heart skittering out of control. Before she could understand what was happening, her bedroom door flew open. Her mother, Helena, rushed in, face bloodless, eyes full of terror. "Run, my love, run." She hauled Belle out of bed and shoved her toward the back exit. The gunshots drew closer. Screams, shattering glass, footsteps pounding, dozens of them. "Mom, what's happening? Where's Dad?" Belle asked, her voice shaking. "Don't ask. Just run." They rushed down the rear staircase, but before they could reach the door, a group of men dressed in black appeared and blocked their way. Helena stepped in front of her daughter, arms spread wide like a thin, desperate shield. "What do you want? Money? I'll give you everything. Just don't touch my child." The man in front let out a cold laugh. "We don't need your money. We need the entire Thornwood family to disappear." A gunshot rang out. Helena fell right in front of Belle. Red blood spread across the marble floor. Her mother's eyes were still open, fixed on her, as if she wanted to say something, but she didn't have time. "Mom!" Belle screamed and lunged for her, but a hand seized her and yanked her back. Walt, her father's most loyal bodyguard. He didn't speak. He only dragged her toward the side door. Belle fought him. "Let me go. My mother, my father. Miss, if you don't run right now, you'll die," Walt roared, his voice raw. They raced through the corridor leading to the grand hall. And Belle saw her father. Edward Thornwood, the gentleman, was fighting dozens of attackers. Alone, blood streamed from his shoulder, from his forehead, but he stayed upright. He kept fighting. He saw Belle. Father and daughter locked eyes for a split second. Then he shouted, "Run, Isabel! Don't look back." Another gunshot cracked through the air. Edward Thornwood crumpled in the center of the grand hall. "Dad!" Walt clamped a hand over Belle's mouth, dragged her out through the side door, and into the night. She looked back one last time. Flames were beginning to surge from the east wing. Thornwood Manor, the home she'd grown up in, was sinking into a sea of fire, and her parents were left behind inside it. Belle sat on the bed, both hands covering her face, her shoulders trembling with muffled sobs. 6 years. 6 years of trying to forget. 6 years of trying to live like an ordinary person. But the wound had never healed. The pain had never eased. She stood, walked to the mirror. In the dim darkness, she saw herself. A thin woman, pale, dark circles under her eyes, hair tangled, nothing like the girl in the silver dress from back then. But the eyes were still the same eyes. Gray-blue, bright, proud. The eyes of the gentleman's daughter. "Dad, Mom," she whispered to her reflection in the mirror. "I'm still alive. I'm still here." At the same time, a few miles away, in the luxurious penthouse of a 5-star hotel, Julian Blackwood couldn't sleep either. He sat at his desk, an empty whiskey glass beside him, a laptop glowing in front of his face. On the screen was an old file on the Thornwood family. Articles about the attack 6 years ago. Photos of the scene, and a photograph of Isabel Thornwood. Julian stared at it. The girl in the silver dress, golden hair, radiant smile, gray-blue eyes bright as stars. Then he looked at another image, a still from the security camera at the Gilded Rose, a server named Beth Sullivan, hair neatly tied back, head lowered, thin, pallid. But when she lifted her head, those eyes, those gray-blue eyes. Julian set the two pictures side by side. His heart began to beat faster. The line of her face, the shape of her lips, the delicate chin, and the eyes, impossible to mistake. "She's alive," Julian murmured, his voice rough with emotion. "Isabel Thornwood is alive." He closed the laptop and looked out the window. Seattle glittered in the night, scattered with lights. Somewhere out there, the girl with gray-blue eyes was living another life. A life where she had to hide herself. A life where she had to become invisible. Julian clenched his fist. He needed to know more. He needed to be sure. And if it was truly her, he wouldn't leave her alone anymore. Belle sat there until the sky began to turn a pale gray. She didn't sleep. She didn't cry anymore. She only sat and stared into the darkness, letting her thoughts churn and spiral. The invitation still lay on the bed, its gold-stamped letters catching the streetlight whenever it slanted in. Sterling Estate, Thornwood Manor, her home. For 6 years she'd lived like a shadow. For 6 years she'd kept her head down, swallowed humiliation, pretended she didn't exist. For 6 years she'd let Veronica, Sterling, and people like her grind their boots into her dignity without a single word. Why? To survive, to be safe, to make sure no one recognized who she really was. But tonight, when she looked into the mirror, when she met the gray-blue eyes of her own reflection, Belle suddenly understood something. She was alive, but she wasn't truly living. She was only existing, like a ghost, like a walking corpse. Her father hadn't died so she could live like this. Her mother hadn't sacrificed herself so Belle could become a coward. Belle stood. She crossed to the corner of the room, where one floorboard sat slightly loose. She knelt and used her fingernails to pry it up. Beneath it was a small wooden box, coated in dust. The only box she'd carried with her when she fled 6 years ago. The only thing left from her old life. Belle lifted it, blew the dust away, and slowly opened the lid. Inside were fragments of memory. A family photograph, taken on her 18th birthday. Her father stood in the center, tall and composed, elegant, a warm smile on his face. Her mother stood beside him, beautiful and gentle, her hand resting on Belle's shoulder. And Belle, Isabel Thornwood, standing between her parents, happy, carefree, never imagining that only 3 years later, everything would dissolve into smoke. Belle touched the photograph, her trembling fingers gliding over her parents' faces. Tears rose again, but she didn't wipe them away. She let them fall. She let them wash through 6 years of suffering, 6 years of loneliness, 6 years of hiding in the dark. Beneath the photo was a ring, her mother's wedding ring, a simple band of white gold with a small diamond set into it. Her mother had worn it for 25 years, until the very last night. Walt had found it in the rubble and kept it for her. Belle slipped the ring onto her pinky, the only finger it fit on now, on her thin, worn hand. Then she took out the last thing in the box, a necklace. A silver chain with a white rose pendant, exquisitely engraved. The symbol of the Thornwood family. Her mother had worn that necklace to every important event. She'd said it was a symbol of honor, of dignity, of everything the Thornwood name stood for. Belle held the necklace, studying the white rose as it caught the dim light. Then she fastened it around her neck. The metal was cold against her skin, but Belle felt warmth bloom inside her, as if her mother were holding her, as if her father were standing beside her. And in her mind, her father's voice rose, clear as if he were right there. "Isabel, remember this. No one gives you dignity, and no one can take it away. It lives inside you. It is you, no matter what happens. Never let anyone steal it from you." Belle closed her eyes. She drew in a deep breath. Then she opened them and looked into the mirror. The woman staring back was still thin, still pale, still exhausted. But something had changed. The gaze, those gray-blue eyes were no longer dull. They lit up, proud, determined, like Isabel Thornwood's eyes from long ago. "I won't bow my head anymore, Dad," Belle whispered. "I won't run anymore. It's time for me to go back." She glanced at the clock, 2 o'clock in the morning. She picked up her phone, opened her contacts, and found a name she hadn't dared call for 6 years. Camille Rivera, her closest friend since childhood, the daughter of one of her father's old allies, the only person besides Walt who knew she was still alive. Camille had tried to reach her so many times in the early years, but Belle hadn't answered. She'd been afraid of dragging her friend into danger, afraid that if anyone discovered Camille knew where she was, they'd come for both of them. But tonight, that fear didn't matter anymore. Belle pressed call. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3 rings. Then the sound of someone picking up. "Hello." Camille's voice was sleepy, husky. "Camille, it's Belle. Isabel." Silence. A silence so long Belle thought the call had dropped. Then a muffled sob. "Belle. Oh my God. Belle. Is it really you? I thought you were." Camille's voice broke. The sound of crying on the other end made Belle's own tears spill again. "It's me. I'm alive. And I need your help. Where are you?" "I'm coming right now. Right now. Give me your address. Seattle. I'll text you the address. I'll be there tomorrow morning. Wait for me. Don't go anywhere. Wait for me. Okay, I'll wait." Belle ended the call, sent the address, and sat back down on the bed, clutching the necklace against her chest. For the first time in 6 years, she didn't feel alone. The next morning, around 9 o'clock, a glossy black Porsche Cayenne stopped in front of Belle's worn old building. The door opened. Camille stepped out, still elegant, still powerful the way Belle remembered, but with eyes reddened from crying through the flight. Belle stood at the entrance of the building. The two women looked at each other. 6 years. 6 years without seeing one another. 6 years of thinking they'd lost each other forever. Then Camille ran to her and pulled Belle into a fierce embrace, and they both cried. Cried the way people cry when they've never truly been allowed to cry at all. They sat in Belle's tiny apartment, 2 cups of coffee gone cold on the table. Camille wouldn't let go of Belle's hand, as if she was terrified that the moment she released her, her friend would vanish again. Belle told her everything. She told her about the nightmare 6 years ago, about the gunshots, about her mother's blood spreading across the marble floor, about her father collapsing in the middle of the grand hall. She told her about the days on the run, about Walt taking her somewhere safe, about how she'd had to change her name, change her appearance, change her entire life to become Beth Sullivan, an ordinary girl who served tables. Camille listened, tears streaming without end, but she didn't interrupt. Then Belle spoke about the man who'd betrayed her family, Raymond Crane. The name left Belle's lips like a curse. My father's closest advisor, the man my father trusted like a brother. The man who ate at our table, came to every one of my birthdays, even taught me chess when I was little. Belle's voice hardened, cold as ice, and he's the one who sold information about my father's secret meeting to Arthur Sterling. He told Sterling the time, the place, the number of guards, everything. He opened the door for the assassins to walk into my home. Camille squeezed Belle's hand tighter. "Oh my God, Belle, are you sure?" Walt told me. He saw Crane talking to Sterling's people before the night of the attack. At the time, he didn't understand, but later, when everything happened, he understood it all. As if his name had summoned him, there was a knock at the door. Belle stood and opened it. Walt was there, still wearing the night security uniform from the Gilded Rose. He was nearly 60 now, hair gone gray, back slightly bent, but his eyes were still sharp as blades. "Miss," he bowed his head, his voice respectful, as if Belle were still the princess of Thornwood Manor. "Walt, you don't have to call me that anymore. To me, you'll always be Miss." Walt stepped inside and nodded to Camille. "Miss Rivera, it's good to see you again." Camille nodded back, her eyes still red. "Walt, you've been here the whole time? In Seattle?" "I've stayed with Miss from the very first day." Walt lowered himself into the worn old chair and let out a long breath. "I took a job as night security at the Gilded Rose so I could stay close to her, to protect her from a distance. She didn't want me interfering, didn't want anyone to know she was alive, so all I could do was remain in the shadows and watch." His voice dropped even further. 6 years I watched them humiliate you. 6 years I had to hold myself back from rushing out and punching Veronica Sterling every time she tormented you. But I understood. I understood why you had to endure it. For safety. For survival." Belle looked at Walt, her vision blurred with tears. The old man had sacrificed 6 years of his life to protect her from afar, without a single complaint, without asking for anything. "But I didn't only watch," Walt said. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small black USB drive. "For 6 years, I've been collecting evidence. Quietly, carefully. Emails between Raymond Crane and Arthur Sterling. Bank transfers sent to Crane after the attack, and most importantly, an audio recording. I had long suspected Crane's shifty glances. I risked everything to bug the study hours before the attack, capturing the very moment the betrayal was sealed. Crane's voice, discussing the plan with Sterling to kill my employer and his entire family." Belle stared at the USB, her heart beating hard. This was it. The thing that could expose everything. The thing that could return justice to her parents. "Why didn't you use it sooner?" Belle asked, her voice gone rough. "Because no one would believe an old security guard. Because Sterling is too powerful. Because if I acted alone, I'd die before the evidence ever saw daylight, and Miss would lose the last person protecting her." Walt looked at Belle, and something lit in his aging eyes. "But now, Miss isn't alone anymore, and I think it's time." Belle picked up the USB. It was tiny, weightless, and yet it felt as heavy as a sentence. She looked at Camille. Camille looked back, and for the first time since she'd arrived, a real smile appeared on her lips. "So we've got a weapon now." At the same time, in the penthouse of a 5-star hotel, Julian Blackwood stood before the glass window, looking down on the city of Seattle. The whiskey in his hand had been empty for a long time, but he didn't bother to pour more. His mind was occupied by a different face, a different pair of eyes, gray-blue, like the sky before a storm. The door opened. Marco walked in, Julian's right-hand man. He was tall and lean, around 40 years old, a face as cold as ice, but eyes so sharp they missed nothing. In the underworld, Marco was known as a fox, because nothing ever escaped his scent. "Boss, I've got the results." Julian turned, his gaze sharpening. "Talk." Marco placed a file on the desk and opened it to the first page. Beth Sullivan, 27 years old, worked as a server at the Gilded Rose for 3 years. Current address is a small apartment in the Brooklyn district of Seattle. No relatives, no friends, no significant connections. He paused, frowning. "But there's a problem." "What problem?" "Her background is too clean. Clean in a way that doesn't make sense." Marco flipped to the next page. No medical records before 6 years ago. No education records. No bank accounts. No credit history. Nothing at all. Like she appeared out of thin air 6 years ago. Julian stayed silent, but his eyes turned colder. 6 years. The same time as the attack on the Thornwood family. I dug deeper, Marco continued. The name Beth Sullivan was first registered in a small town about 500 miles east of Seattle. She rented a boarding room there for about 6 months, then disappeared. After that, she appeared in Seattle, applied for a serving job, and has kept her head down ever since. Identification papers. Fake. High quality, but still fake. Someone created an entirely new identity for her. Julian's fingers tightened around the arm of the chair. His instincts had been right. That girl was running from something. Or someone. There's more. Marco pulled a photograph from the file. An old photo, slightly blurred, taken at a party years ago. Julian recognized it immediately. The party at Thornwood Manor, 6 years earlier. The one he'd attended. In the picture, Edward Thornwood stood at the center, poised and elegant. Beside him was a young woman in a silver dress, golden blonde hair, a radiant smile. Isabel Thornwood, the gentleman's daughter. Marco placed that photo beside another, a still from the security camera at the Gilded Rose. The server named Beth Sullivan, head lowered, hair neatly tied back, thin, pallid. I ran facial recognition software, Marco said. Jawline, eye shape, facial proportions, all match. Accuracy is 97%. Julian picked up the 2 photos and held them side by side. He studied them. The girl in the silver dress, young, beautiful, confident. The server, thin, pale, head bowed. 6 years. 6 years of hardship. 6 years in hiding. 6 years living like a shadow. But eyes didn't change. Those gray-blue eyes, he'd recognize them anywhere. She's alive, Julian murmured, his voice gone rough. Isabel Thornwood is alive. Marco nodded. Seems that way. The question is, why is she hiding? And why is she working at Sterling's restaurant? Julian set the photos down, walked to the window, and stared out over the city. Why? The answer was obvious. She was hiding right under her enemy's nose. She was waiting. Waiting for what? The right moment. A chance for revenge, or simply the chance to survive. When is Veronica Sterling's wedding? Julian asked, not turning around. This Saturday. Sterling sent you an invitation last week. Julian was silent for a moment. Then he spoke, his voice cold as steel. Get the car ready. I'm going to the wedding. Marco frowned. Boss, I thought you didn't like Sterling. You said his deal wasn't worth you flying to Seattle. The deal isn't. Julian turned, and in his eyes there was something Marco had never seen before. But she is. He looked again at the photograph of Isabel Thornwood. 6 years ago, I couldn't protect her family. 6 years ago, I thought she was dead, and I did nothing. His voice dropped. This time will be different. That very afternoon, Camille turned Belle's small apartment into a strategic war room. She spread sketches, notebooks, and a laptop across the battered old wooden table, her eyes blazing with purpose. This was her territory. Camille Rivera wasn't only a celebrated fashion designer in Los Angeles. She was someone who understood the power of an image, the power of an entrance, the power of the first moment when someone steps into a room, and she was going to use everything she had to turn Belle into the sharpest weapon of all. We've got 10 days, Camille said, her fingers tapping a steady rhythm on the tabletop. 10 days to turn Beth Sullivan back into Isabel Thornwood. Not the Isabel from 6 years ago, but a version that's stronger, more powerful, and more frightening. Belle sat across from her, listening. The white rose necklace still hung at her throat, hidden beneath her shirt. First, the dress. Camille opened the laptop and began to sketch. White. Pure white. White like the Thornwood family's white rose. She looked at Belle, her expression serious. Veronica will be wearing a white wedding dress. She thinks she's the queen of that night. But when you walk in wearing white, wearing your family's symbol, everyone will understand who the true owner of that house is. Camille's fingers moved across the screen, shaping clean, deliberate lines. The finest silk, an elegant cut, fitted through the upper body to honor your shape, then flaring softly from the hips like petals opening. Not too extravagant, not too loud, just simply perfect. The kind of dress only people with real class dare to wear. Belle stared at the sketch, her heart beating faster. The gown was breathtaking. It wasn't like the flashy outfits Veronica always wore. It was refined, graceful, regal, the way her mother had taught her style was supposed to be. Jewelry, Camille went on. You don't need much. You don't need glittering diamonds or blinding gold. You only need one thing. She pointed to the necklace resting against Belle's chest. The white rose, Thornwood's symbol. When the old bosses see it, they'll recognize it, they'll remember, and they'll understand who you are. Belle touched the necklace, feeling the cold metal beneath her fingertips. Her mother had worn it for 25 years. Now it belonged to her. Next, the hair. Camille stood and circled Belle, studying her. You dyed it brown to hide for 6 years. But Isabel Thornwood has golden hair. We'll bring you back to your natural color, and we'll wear it up, high. She lifted Belle's hair with her hands, shaping it. A high bun like a crown. It'll show your neck. It'll show the necklace. When you walk in, they won't see a waitress. They'll see a queen. Belle looked toward the mirror, trying to imagine what Camille was describing. She'd forgotten the feeling of being herself, the feeling of lifting her head, meeting someone's eyes, not bowing, not shrinking away. But a beautiful dress and beautiful hair aren't enough, Camille said. She sat down in front of Belle and took her hands. You need to become Isabel again, not only on the outside, but from the inside. She held Belle's gaze. For 6 years you learned how to lower your head, how to walk softly, speak softly, disappear. Now you've got to forget all of it. Belle swallowed. She understood what Camille meant, and she knew that would be the hardest part. We're going to start over, Camille said. She stood and pulled Belle up with her. How you walk, how you stand, how you speak, how you look someone in the eye without flinching. Everything your parents taught you, everything you tried to forget, we're taking it back. She placed a hand on Belle's shoulder and pressed her upright. Shoulders open, chin up, back straight, like an invisible string is pulling from the crown of your head into the sky. You don't beg for attention. You demand respect. Belle drew in a deep breath and forced her shoulders back, forced her chin higher. At first, her body resisted. 6 years of keeping her head down had trained her into folding inward, making herself smaller. But slowly, bit by bit, she found the old sensation again. Now, walk across the room, Camille ordered. Belle started forward. The first step was awkward. The second was steadier. By the third, the fourth, the fifth, she began to remember. Where to place her feet, how to move her hips, how to let the dress glide with each step like water. Better. Camille nodded. Keep going. In 10 days, when you step into Sterling Estate, you won't walk in as a guest. You'll walk in as the true owner of that house. Belle stopped in the middle of the room and turned back to Camille. For the first time in 6 years, she felt something ignite in her chest. Not fear, not despair, hope, and resolve. 3 days after Camille arrived in Seattle, everything was going according to plan. Belle had begun retraining the way she walked, the way she stood, the way she spoke. The dress was being rushed through at Camille's private atelier in Los Angeles and would be shipped in a few days. Belle's hair had been dyed back to its natural golden blonde, and every day she stood in front of the mirror, practicing lifting her chin, practicing meeting another person's eyes without flinching or looking away. But they didn't know someone was watching. That afternoon, a man sat inside a black Ford, parked about 50 meters from Belle's building. His name was Tony, one of Raymond Crane's trusted men, the kind who handled the filthy work Crane didn't want to do with his own hands. Tony had been sent to this area to keep an eye on a different target, but he'd stumbled onto something far more interesting. A glossy black Porsche Cayenne, with California plates, had been parked in front of this rundown building for 3 straight days. Who in a slum like this had visitors arriving in a luxury SUV? Tony took photos of the vehicle and of the woman who stepped out of it. He recognized her immediately. Camille Rivera, a famous fashion designer. He'd seen her face in magazines, on television. The question was, what was an A-list designer doing in a neighborhood like this, and who was she meeting? Tony called Raymond Crane at once. Mr. Crane, I've got something you need to see. On the other end, Raymond Crane was sitting in his office at Sterling Estate, preparing for the upcoming wedding. When he saw the photos Tony sent, his brows drew together. Camille Rivera. The name stirred something in his memory. Then it came back to him. Rivera. The Rivera family had once been Thornwood allies, and Camille Rivera had been Edward Thornwood's daughter's closest friend since childhood. Isabel Thornwood, the girl he'd believed dead 6 years ago. Keep watching, Raymond ordered, his voice turning cold. I want to know who she's meeting. Inside Belle's apartment, the mood had been almost light, as Camille guided Belle on how to hold a champagne flute with effortless elegance. Walt sat in the corner, silent as always, watching. Then suddenly he stood, walked to the window, and looked down at the street, his old eyes sharpened. "There's a problem," he said, his voice low and tight. Belle and Camille stopped and looked at him. "That black Ford across the street. It's been there since yesterday morning. And the man inside is pointing a lens at this window." Camille rushed to the window and looked down. Just as Walt said, a black car sat parked not far away, and she could see the faint reflection of a camera lens from inside. Her face went pale. "Oh my God. They know. They know Belle is here." Belle felt her blood run backward in her veins. 6 years in hiding. 6 years of measuring every step. And now, because of Camille's Porsche, because a famous designer's presence in this neighborhood didn't make sense, everything could collapse. "Stay calm." Walt lifted a hand, his voice steady as if nothing were happening. "They might not know yet. They saw the luxury car. They saw Miss Rivera. But they don't know who Miss Rivera is meeting." He turned to Belle. "Miss, you haven't left the apartment since Miss Rivera arrived, have you?" Belle shook her head. "Then all they know is that a famous designer came to this neighborhood. They might think she's doing charity work, or meeting someone else. They don't have proof she's meeting you." Camille drew a deep breath, forcing herself to steady. "So what do we do?" Walt thought for a moment, then said, "We change locations. Right now. Miss Rivera, do you have somewhere secure?" "I'm staying at the Fairmont Olympic. Penthouse. Tight security." "Good. Miss will go there with you. I'll stay here, act like nothing happened. If they're watching, they'll see Miss Rivera leave alone, and I'll still be here like always." Belle looked at Walt, worry tightening her chest. "What about you? If they suspect you?" "I'm just an old security guard," Walt said, smiling, though the smile never reached his eyes. "No one notices me. That's the advantage of being invisible, miss. The thing you've been doing for 6 years." An hour later, Camille drove away from the building alone. She took a winding route through multiple streets, making sure no one followed her, then picked Belle up at a secret meeting point 2 miles away. When the two of them sat inside the car, Camille looked at Belle, her eyes still tense. "We almost got exposed." Belle nodded, her heart still racing. "But we didn't. Not yet." She looked out the window as Seattle slid past like a dream. "We still have time, and we won't let them ruin the plan." On the final day before the wedding, the penthouse at the Fairmont Olympic became a private beauty studio. Camille had hired the best professional team in Seattle, people she trusted completely, all of them bound by strict confidentiality agreements. No one was allowed to know who their client was. No one was allowed to take photos. No one was allowed to say a word. They only knew they were preparing an important woman, and the money they were paid was enough to make them forget every trace of curiosity. Belle sat in front of the mirror, while expert hands worked through her hair. The dull brown dye she'd used as camouflage for 6 years began to vanish, replaced by her natural golden blonde, her real color, the color her mother had worn too. She watched each strand of gold fall onto her shoulders, and something inside her began to wake up. After hair came skin. 6 years of grinding work. Too little sleep, too little food had left her complexion pale and rough, with dark shadows under her eyes. But under the specialist's hands, her skin began to return to life. Hydrating masks, vitamin serum, facial massage, all the luxuries she hadn't touched for 6 years. Then came her nails, fingers hardened from carrying trays, from scrubbing, from doing every kind of heavy work, were tended with careful patience. Nails were shaped neatly, then painted with a soft nude shade, understated, elegant, not loud, but flawless. By late afternoon, when the beauty team had left, Camille locked the penthouse door and turned to Belle with a mysterious smile. "Ready?" Belle nodded, her heart racing. Camille disappeared into the next room and returned with a large white box. She set it on the bed, lifted the lid, and gently drew out what was inside. The dress. Belle stopped breathing. It was more beautiful than anything she'd ever imagined. Pure white silk, soft as clouds, catching the light with a quiet shimmer. The cut was elegant, fitted through the bodice, then flowing outward from the hips like petals opening. There were no gaudy stones, no complicated patterns, only perfection. In every stitch, in every fold of fabric. "I stayed up 3 nights to finish it," Camille said, pride in her voice. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever made. And it's only for you." Belle reached out and touched the gown, her trembling fingers sliding over the silk. Tears rose, but she didn't wipe them away. She let them fall. "Put it on," Camille said softly. Belle slipped out of her old t-shirt and jeans and let Camille help her into the dress. The silk was cool against her skin, wrapping around her like a gentle embrace. Camille pulled the zipper, adjusted each fold, then stepped back. "Turn around and look in the mirror." Belle turned slowly, and she saw herself. Not Beth Sullivan, the thin, pale waitress who always kept her head down, but someone else. Her golden hair was swept into a high bun like a crown, exposing the graceful line of her neck. The white dress fit her perfectly, making her look taller, more regal. Her skin had been restored, bright, alive, and her gray-blue eyes, the eyes she'd tried to hide for 6 years, now shone like 2 stars. At her throat, the white rose necklace rested in its rightful place, gleaming under the light. Thornwood's symbol, her family's symbol. Belle stared into the mirror, and for the first time in 6 years, she recognized herself. Not Beth Sullivan, Isabel Thornwood, the gentleman's daughter. Tears ran down her cheeks, but Belle wasn't crying from sadness. She was crying because at last, after 6 years of living like a shadow, she'd found herself again. Camille stepped beside her and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Who do you see?" Belle swallowed hard, her voice trembling. "I see my father's daughter." Camille wrapped her arms around Belle from behind, and both of them watched the mirror, eyes shining with tears. Right then, there was a knock at the door. Camille went to open it, and Walt stepped in. The old man had traded his uniform for a crisp black suit, silver hair neatly combed, looking nothing like the night guard from the restaurant. He entered the room, saw Belle, and stopped dead. His old eyes widened, his lips moved, but no sound came. Then tears began to run down his wrinkled cheeks. "Miss," his voice turned rough, breaking with emotion. "Your master would be so proud. Your mistress would be so proud. You're so beautiful, beautiful, just like your mistress was back then." Belle stepped forward and hugged the old man who'd sacrificed 6 years of his life to protect her. "Thank you, Walt, for everything." Walt patted her back gently, his voice shaking. "Tonight, Miss will show them. You'll show all of them. The Thornwood family never fell." Belle stepped back and looked into the mirror one more time. The girl in the mirror looked back, gray-blue eyes blazing with resolve. Tonight, the phoenix would rise from the ashes. The wedding night had arrived. Sterling Estate blazed against the darkness like a palace out of a fairy tale. Thousands of crystal lights hung everywhere, from the main gate to the grand hall, from the corridors to the gardens, forming a sea of glittering brilliance, like starlight fallen onto the earth. The stone driveway leading into the estate was covered in a red carpet, and on both sides stood perfectly trimmed pots of deep red roses. But Belle knew that 6 years ago, those pots had held white roses, the Thornwood family's white roses. Hundreds of luxury cars lined up at the gate. Rolls-Royce, Bentley, Maybach, Mercedes, all of them gleaming under the lights. Uniformed drivers stood at attention beside the vehicles, waiting for their employers. Bodyguards in black suits were stationed everywhere, earpieces in place, eyes scanning every guest who entered. This wasn't just a wedding. It was the biggest event of the year for West Coast high society and the underworld alike. Inside the grand hall, the scene was even more extravagant. The ceiling rose high above with enormous crystal chandeliers, each one worth a fortune to an ordinary person. The black marble floor shone like glass, reflecting the lights like a still lake. Banquet tables were arranged with meticulous elegance. White tablecloths, polished silver place settings, and fragrant vases of fresh flowers. A classical ensemble played soft waltzes in the corner. Veronica Sterling stood at the center, dazzling in a wedding gown encrusted with thousands of Swarovski crystals. The skirt billowed like a white cloud, the train nearly 3 meters long, requiring 2 bridesmaids to lift it as they followed her. A diamond tiara crowned her head. A blaze of red ruby jewelry glowed at her throat, and on her hand sat an engagement ring with a diamond as large as a pea. She stood there like a queen, proudly greeting each guest who entered, her lipstick red smile bright and triumphant. Beside Veronica, Preston Montgomery stood with barely concealed indifference. The groom wore a white suit, hair neatly styled, but his eyes were cold and distant. He shook hands with guests mechanically, nodding and offering greetings without much interest. This was a political marriage. Everyone knew it. Preston needed Sterling's power on the West Coast, and Sterling needed Preston's backing in the South. Love had never been part of this arrangement. Arthur Sterling moved through the hall, shaking hands with each boss, each politician, each powerful businessman. He wore a black suit, silver hair slicked back, that familiar false smile fixed on his face. Every handshake was a bargain, every greeting a calculation. Sterling was at the peak of his power, and tonight was his night to display it all. Close behind Arthur Sterling walked Raymond Crane. The traitor wore a gray suit, standing one step behind his master, always ready to bow and flatter. He introduced each guest to Sterling, murmured useful information into his ear, grinning broadly at everyone. No one guessed that the hands offering such friendly handshakes had once been stained with the Thornwood family's blood. Exactly at 7 o'clock in the evening, a convoy of glossy black Maybachs rolled through the estate gates. Bodyguards immediately spread out and cleared a path. Everyone knew whose convoy it was. Julian Blackwood stepped out of the car, tall, cold, dangerous. He wore a perfectly tailored black three-piece suit. His slightly wavy black hair neatly combed back, dark brown eyes sweeping across the crowd like a predator hunting. Marco walked at his side, with 4 bodyguards behind them. Arthur Sterling approached at once, his counterfeit smile wider than ever. "Julian, I'm so glad you could make it. What an honor for us." Julian shook Sterling's hand, his face unreadable. "I never miss an important event." But his eyes weren't on Sterling. His gaze slid over the crowd, searching for a different face, a different pair of gray-blue eyes. Would she come? Would she dare to appear? Julian didn't know, but he would wait. In the corner of the hall, Veronica was talking with her friends, occasionally flicking her eyes toward the main entrance. "Has that servant girl shown up yet?" she asked, her voice full of anticipation. "I invited her. I can't wait to watch the comedy." One of her friends giggled. "She probably won't dare come. She knows her place." "She'd better come," Veronica shrugged, her eyes glittering with cruelty. "I've got a whole little show prepared for her. Tonight is going to be fun." She didn't know that in just a few minutes, the show would begin, but not according to her script. Exactly at 7:30 in the evening, when the party had reached its peak, a pure white Rolls-Royce Phantom slowly rolled through the estate gates. The car was nothing like the black Maybachs and gray Bentleys around it. It stood out like a pearl among river stones. The gate security glanced at one another, unsure which guest this belonged to. They didn't have this vehicle on their list, but the sheer luxury radiating from it made them hesitate to stop it. The car came to a halt right at the edge of the red carpet. The driver stepped out, walked around to the back, and opened the door. Camille Rivera stepped out first. She wore a blazing red dress, black hair loose over her shoulders, seductive and self-assured. Guests standing near the entrance recognized her at once. The famous fashion designer from Los Angeles. Whispering began to spread. "Camille Rivera. What is she doing here? I didn't know she was invited." Camille smiled, nodded politely to the curious stares, then turned back toward the car. She extended her hand, and the door opened again. A long, slender hand, nails painted a nude shade, took Camille's hand. Then a white high heel touched the red carpet, satin silk, a heel thin as a needle, elegant and aristocratic. Then came the dress. Pure white silk like snow, soft as clouds, catching the crystal lights with a quiet shimmer. It was fitted through the upper body, honoring a graceful silhouette, then flared gently from the hips like petals opening, like ocean waves rolling in. With each step, the gown moved as if it had a life of its own. Then came the face. Golden blonde hair like late afternoon sun was swept into a high bun like a crown, revealing the delicate line of her neck and bare, luminous shoulders. Small diamond earrings glinted at her ears. Her skin was bright and rosy, her lips a natural pale pink, needing no loud crimson lipstick. And the eyes, gray-blue eyes like the sky before a storm, blazing like twin stars, calm as she looked straight ahead. No shrinking back, no lowered head, only the frightening composure of someone who knew exactly who she was. And at her throat, resting perfectly in the hollow above her collarbone, was the necklace, a silver chain with a white rose pendant, exquisitely engraved. The symbol of the Thornwood family. Belle stepped out of the car and stood on the red carpet, back straight, chin lifted, shoulders open. She didn't enter as a guest. She entered as the rightful owner of this house. Because she was the rightful owner. And time seemed to stop. The soft waltz music suddenly felt far away. The murmur of conversation died. The clink of champagne glasses froze mid-air. The entire hall turned toward the main entrance. Hundreds of eyes locked onto the woman who had just appeared. "Who is she?" Someone whispered. "I've never seen her before. She's stunning. Who is she? Look at that dress. That's a custom Camille Rivera design. Wait, that necklace. It looks familiar." Belle walked along the red carpet. Each step, slow, steady, deliberate. The silk brushed the floor like water. Crystal light poured down, making her glow like an angel stepped out of heaven. She didn't look at anyone. She didn't need to. She only walked, and the whole world had to look at her. In the center of the hall, Veronica Sterling was laughing with guests when she heard the swelling whispers. She turned, wanting to see what was happening, and the smile on her lips froze. Her face went pale as a corpse. Her eyes widened, unable to believe what she was seeing. That couldn't be the shabby little server she'd invited as a joke. That couldn't be the thin, pallid girl who always kept her head down, the one Veronica had humiliated for 3 years. This was a queen. Not far away, Julian Blackwood was speaking with a boss from San Francisco. But when he felt the air in the room shift, he turned, and his heart seemed to stop. It was her, Isabel Thornwood. There was no doubt anymore. Those gray-blue eyes, that golden hair, the way she stood, the way she walked, the way she held her head high. She had come back, and she was more beautiful than anything he'd ever remembered. In the corner of the hall, Raymond Crane held a drink and spoke with a politician. Then he saw the woman entering. He saw the necklace at her throat, the white rose, the symbol he'd thought had been buried with the Thornwood family 6 years ago. The glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the marble floor, but he didn't hear it break. He didn't hear anything at all except the frantic, pounding roar of his own heartbeat. Because if that woman was alive, if Isabel Thornwood was alive, then everything he'd done 6 years ago would be dragged into the light, and he would die. Veronica stood frozen for a few seconds, unable to believe her own eyes. But she was Arthur Sterling's daughter, trained to never show weakness in front of anyone. She drew a deep breath, forced a smile back onto her lips, and started walking toward Belle. Veronica's friends trailed behind her, eyes wide as they stared at the woman they'd once laughed at. No one could find the shabby waitress from the past in the regal woman standing before them now. Wow. Veronica stopped in front of Belle, her voice trying to stay composed, but a tremor slipped through that she couldn't quite control. "You really came. I almost didn't recognize you." Belle turned her head slowly. Gray-blue met Veronica's black eyes, and in that moment, something shifted. For 6 years, Belle had been the one forced to lower her head, to avoid, to endure. But tonight, the positions had reversed. Veronica had to tilt her chin up to look at Belle, because Belle's heels made her nearly half a head taller, and Belle was the one looking down at Veronica, calm, unafraid. "You invited me, remember?" Belle said softly, clearly, loud enough for the people nearby to hear. "I didn't want to disappoint you." Heat rushed into Veronica's face. This wasn't the script she'd prepared. She'd imagined Beth Sullivan arriving in something cheap, awkward among the elite, so Veronica could humiliate her in front of everyone. Not this. Not a woman beautiful as a goddess, confident as a queen, standing there looking at her as if she were an ant. "You've changed so much," Veronica said, trying for mockery, but her voice sounded more defensive than sharp. "I almost thought you were someone else." Belle smiled, gentle, elegant, but with something dangerous underneath. "I haven't changed," she said slowly, each word precise. "You just never really saw me." Veronica went pale. She opened her mouth, trying to say something, trying to strike back, trying to seize control of the conversation again. But no words came, because in those gray-blue eyes, she saw something that made cold fear crawl up her spine. That wasn't the gaze of a waitress. That was the gaze of someone with power. Someone dangerous. Someone waiting for the right moment to strike. Around them, guests began to murmur. They didn't know what was happening, but they could feel the tension between the bride and the mysterious woman. Someone noticed the necklace at Belle's throat and frowned, trying to remember where they'd seen it before. Not far away, Raymond Crane was backing slowly into a darker corner. Sweat streamed down his forehead, soaking the collar of his shirt. His eyes were locked on the white rose necklace, unable to look away. He knew that necklace. He'd seen it on Helena Thornwood's throat for 25 years. He'd seen it the night of the attack 6 years ago, glittering in the firelight as Helena fell while shielding her daughter, and he'd believed it had been buried with her. But now it was here, around the neck of a young woman with gray-blue eyes that looked exactly like Edward Thornwood's. Raymond staggered over to Arthur Sterling and grabbed his arm. "Mr. Sterling." His voice shook. "Look, that necklace." Arthur Sterling was busy shaking hands with an important guest. He frowned and turned his head in the direction Raymond indicated. "What? That's Thornwood's symbol," Raymond whispered, his voice strangled tight. "The white rose. There's no mistaking it. That's Helena Thornwood's necklace." Arthur Sterling stared at the woman in white, at the necklace. And for the first time in many years, a chill slid down his spine. "That's impossible," he muttered. "That girl died." "I thought so too," Raymond swallowed hard. "But look at her. Look at those eyes, just like Edward." Arthur Sterling tightened his grip around the wineglass. He studied the mysterious woman, searching for any sign that Raymond was wrong. But the longer he looked, the more the truth took shape in front of him. The lines of her face, the way she stood, the way she looked. All of it echoed Edward Thornwood from long ago. "Get more guards over here," Arthur ordered, his voice low and dangerous. "Quietly. I want to know who that girl is." At the very moment the tension between Belle and Veronica reached its sharpest point, an older man stepped out of the crowd. Don Salvatore, the seasoned boss of San Francisco, the man who'd run his empire for more than 40 years. His hair was pure white, his back slightly bent by age, but his eyes were still sharp as a blade. In the underworld, he was respected not only for power, but for fairness and honor. He was one of the few who'd once been Edward Thornwood's close friend. Don Salvatore moved toward Belle, and with each step the crowd parted to make way. He stopped about 1 step from her, his aged eyes fixed on the necklace at her chest, and he went still. "Holy God," he whispered, but in the silence of the hall everyone heard him clearly. "This necklace, I've seen it. I saw Helena wear it for 25 years. He lifted his head and looked straight into Belle's eyes. Gray-blue met old brown. And in that moment, Don Salvatore saw the past. He saw Edward Thornwood, his closest friend, the man he'd cried for when he heard he'd been murdered. He saw Helena, the gentle woman who'd once danced a waltz with him at a long-ago party. And he saw little Isabel, the child he'd held in his arms when she was only a few months old, the child he'd given a doll to on her 5th birthday. "Are you Isabel?" Don Salvatore's voice trembled. "Edward's daughter." The entire hall fell into absolute silence. The orchestra stopped. Conversations died. Hundreds of eyes fixed on the two of them. No one dared breathe too loudly. Belle looked at Don Salvatore, the man she'd called Sal when she was little, the man who used to give her peppermint candies whenever he visited her father. Tears wanted to rise, but she held them back. This wasn't the time to cry. This was the time to stand tall. She drew in a deep breath, then spoke. Her voice carried through the hall, clear, strong, not trembling at all. "Yes. I'm Isabel Thornwood, daughter of Edward the Gentleman Thornwood." A storm of whispers exploded through the room. Thornwood, Edward Thornwood's daughter. Didn't she die 6 years ago? I thought the whole family was wiped out in that attack. She's alive. How is that possible? Don Salvatore's hands shook as he grasped Belle's, tears streaming down his wrinkled cheeks. My girl. I thought you were dead. I suffered so much believing Thornwood blood had been extinguished." "I'm still alive, Sal," Belle said gently. "I've been in hiding for 6 years, but tonight, I've come back." People's eyes began to turn toward Arthur Sterling. He stood rigid in the middle of the hall, the glass in his hand trembling, his face pale as a corpse. Beside him, Raymond Crane looked like he was about to faint, sweat pouring down, his knees threatening to give way. 6 years ago, Belle continued, her voice echoing through the room, my family was attacked. My father was killed. My mother was killed. Our home was burned, and everyone believed I died that night too. She paused, letting her words settle into every mind. But I didn't die. I survived, and for 6 years, I've been waiting. Waiting for this day. Veronica stammered, her face white. What are you saying? This is my wedding. You don't have the right. Shut up, Veronica, Don Salvatore snapped, his voice cold as ice. Let the girl speak. Belle looked around the hall, meeting faces one by one. Powerful bosses, politicians, business magnates. All of them staring at her with shock, curiosity, and maybe even fear. Then she pulled a small black USB drive from a hidden pocket on her dress and lifted it high so everyone could see. My father was betrayed, she said, her voice steel cold, by someone he trusted like a brother, someone who sold information to the enemy, who opened the door for assassins to enter our home, who stood and watched while my parents were killed. She looked straight into Raymond Crane's eyes, as he trembled in the corner like a hunted animal. And I have proof. Belle spoke slowly, each word falling like a death sentence. In this USB drive are emails, bank transactions, and an audio recording. Enough to prove who the traitor is, and who gave the order to murder my family. The entire hall held its breath. Eyes turned to Arthur Sterling and Raymond Crane. The two men stood frozen, faces drained, unable to speak. Veronica looked at her father, then at Belle, then back at her father. For the first time in her life, she understood that tonight wasn't her night. Tonight belonged to the phoenix rising from the ashes. In that tense, breath-held silence, footsteps rang across the marble floor. Solid, decisive, heavy with authority. Julian Blackwood stepped out of the crowd and moved toward Belle. People parted instinctively to clear his path, no one daring to block him. He was tall, cold, dangerous, like a wolf among sheep, and he was walking straight toward the woman in white. Belle heard the steps and turned. Gray-blue met dark brown. For a moment, time seemed to stop between them. Then Julian stopped right beside her, close at her side, a declaration that didn't need words. The entire hall held its breath. Julian Blackwood, the most powerful Mafia boss on the West Coast, was standing next to Isabel Thornwood. What did that mean? Was he supporting her? Was he taking her side? Julian, Arthur Sterling spoke, his voice trying to sound calm but trembling anyway. What are you doing? This is my family's matter. It has nothing to do with you. Julian didn't look at Arthur. He looked at Belle. Then he looked around the hall, meeting faces one by one. Powerful bosses, allies, enemies, all of them waiting for him to speak. And then he did. His voice was low, carrying through the room, every word clear. 6 years ago, Arthur Sterling approached me with a proposal for a strategic merger to phase out the Thornwood influence. He masked his murderous intent as a strategic takeover. By the time I realized his neutralization meant a cold-blooded massacre, the manor was already in flames. He said Edward Thornwood was becoming too powerful, too well-liked. He said that if we didn't act, Thornwood would control the entire West Coast. He wanted me to contribute money, men, weapons. Julian paused, letting the words sink into every mind. I refused, he said slowly. I refused because Edward Thornwood was a man of honor. He didn't traffic drugs. He didn't harm women and children. He didn't betray allies. He was a boss, but he had principles. Honor. Dignity. Julian's voice hardened. And what Sterling planned, betrayal, assassination, killing women and children, that isn't the way of a man worth respecting. That's the way of a coward. Arthur Sterling shook so hard his wineglass slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. You're lying, he roared, his face flushed with rage and fear. You don't have proof. This is nothing but words. You're slandering me. Julian didn't answer. He only turned his head toward Belle and gave a slight nod. Belle understood. She pulled her phone from the small pocket sewn into her gown, plugged the USB into it, and turned it on. Then she pressed play. The phone's speaker wasn't loud, but in the absolute silence of the hall, everyone heard every word. A voice came through. Raymond Crane's voice. Mr. Sterling, the plan is ready. I've told them Thornwood's meeting schedule. The guards will be reduced that night. The back door won't be locked. They can get in without resistance. Then another voice followed. Arthur Sterling's voice. Good. Remember, leave no one behind. Edward, his wife, and that little girl Isabel too. I don't want anyone left alive to take revenge later. Raymond Crane's voice answered. Understood, sir. I'll make sure the entire Thornwood family disappears forever. The recording ended. A dead, lethal silence fell over the hall. No one spoke. No one dared breathe too hard. Every pair of eyes turned toward Arthur Sterling and Raymond Crane with horror, disgust, and fury. Raymond Crane couldn't take it anymore. His legs buckled, and he collapsed onto the marble floor, trembling like a stray dog. Sweat poured from him, his face white as death, his mouth working on words that wouldn't form. All the years of bowing and flattering, all the power and money he'd gained through betrayal, all of it shattered in that instant. Arthur Sterling stood rigid, unable to believe what had just happened. He opened his mouth, trying to speak, trying to defend himself, trying to deny it, but nothing came out, because the voice on that recording was his. Impossible to deny, impossible to erase. Julian stepped forward one pace, his eyes cold as ice as he looked down at Raymond Crane, kneeling on the floor. Raymond Crane, his voice rang out like a sentence. You betrayed Edward Thornwood, the man who trusted you like a brother. You sold information to the enemy. You caused the deaths of an innocent family. He lifted a hand in a signal. His 4 bodyguards moved at once, surrounding Raymond Crane. Take him. We'll deal with him under our laws. 2 bodyguards grabbed Raymond and hauled him to his feet. He didn't resist. He didn't have the strength left to resist. He only babbled, tears streaming down his face. Please, please spare me. I was only following orders. Sterling made me do it. Please. Shut up, Julian cut in, his voice ice cold. A traitor has no right to beg. Raymond was dragged away, his sobbing echoing, fading behind the door. Belle stood in the center of the hall, watching the man who'd murdered her parents being taken out. 6 years of waiting, 6 years of hiding, 6 years of swallowing humiliation. And at last, justice had been carried out. Preston Montgomery stood rigid, watching everything that had just unfolded. He'd come here to marry, to sign a powerful alliance, to push his empire westward. He hadn't come to witness a scandal of this magnitude. His eyes moved from Raymond Crane being dragged away to Arthur Sterling standing there trembling, then settled on Veronica, his bride, the woman he was supposed to marry, the daughter of a murderer, Preston. Veronica stammered as she moved toward her would-be husband, her gown trailing across the floor. I can explain. This isn't my fault. I didn't know about any of this. Preston looked at her, looked at the lavish wedding dress, the diamond crown, the ruby jewelry burning red against her throat. All of it bought with blood money, money taken from the Thornwood family, money born from the deaths of innocent people. Your family did this. Preston's voice was ice cold, stripped of feeling. Murder, betraying allies, slaughtering an entire family, including women and children. I didn't know, Veronica cried, tears spilling and smearing her expensive mascara. I swear I didn't know. That was my father. It has nothing to do with me. Nothing to do with you. Preston gave a flat, humorless laugh. You live in the house your father stole from someone else. You spend money your father earned by killing people. You humiliated the victim's daughter for years without ever knowing. His gaze dropped to the engagement ring on Veronica's hand, the diamond as big as a pea flashing under the crystal chandeliers. I can't marry someone like you, Preston said, his voice final. The wedding ends here. He took Veronica's hand, slid the ring off her finger, and tucked it into his suit pocket. Preston, no, Veronica screamed, grabbing at his arm. I'm begging you, don't do this. I love you. I didn't do anything wrong. Preston shoved her hand away, cold and decisive. Love, he scoffed. You and I both know this isn't love. This is a business deal. And I don't do business with a family of murderers. He turned his back and walked away without looking back. His entourage followed immediately, leaving the hall like a hard wind. Veronica stood frozen in the middle of the dance floor, her pure white gown suddenly looking like a burial shroud. She turned in place, searching for support, searching for someone to stand with her, but there was no one. The friends who'd once laughed beside her were stepping away now, eyes sliding aside. The guests she'd proudly welcomed moments ago were looking at her with contempt, with disgust. No admiration, no envy, only scorn. No, Veronica choked, tears pouring, mascara streaking her cheeks in black lines of humiliation. No, no, no. She spun and ran out of the hall, her long train dragged behind her, the diamond crown slipping from her head, her sobs echoing, fading beyond the door. The bride of the night had become the joke of the night. Arthur Sterling stood alone in the hall. Around him, the bosses he'd shaken hands with, smiled with, called allies, were backing away. No one wanted to stand near a man who'd betrayed an ally and slaughtered an entire family. In the underworld, Honor was everything, and Arthur Sterling had lost everything. Don Salvatore stepped in front of Arthur, his aged eyes cold as ice. "Arthur Sterling," his voice rang out like a sentence, "you betrayed Edward Thornwood, my closest friend. You killed Helena, the woman I considered a sister. You nearly killed Isabel, the child I once held in my arms." He spat at Arthur's feet. "From this moment on, you are no one in this world. No one will do business with you. No one will protect you. You will spend the rest of your life in fear, waiting for the day justice comes knocking." One boss after another turned and walked out of the hall. One guest after another left without looking back. Arthur Sterling remained there, alone, in a room that was emptying fast, like a ghost from the past. Belle stood in the center of the hall, watching it all happen. 6 years. 6 years she'd waited for this moment. And now, for the first time in 6 years, people were looking at her with respect. No longer the waitress they dismissed. She was Isabel Thornwood. And she had come home. As the grand hall slowly emptied, Belle quietly stepped out onto the back balcony. She needed air. She needed silence. She needed one moment to breathe after everything that had just happened. The balcony overlooked the estate's vast garden. Under the silver moon, the deep red roses glimmered like drops of blood gone cold. But Belle remembered that 6 years ago, this garden hadn't been planted with red roses. Her mother had planted white ones. Hundreds of pure white rose bushes, filling the mornings with fragrance. Her mother had tended every bloom, watering, pruning, speaking to them as if they were her children. Helena loved this garden. Her mother used to tell Belle, "Every white rose is a prayer for our family." Now the white roses were gone. Sterling had replaced them with red ones, wiping away every trace of the Thornwood name. But they couldn't erase memory, and they couldn't erase Belle. Footsteps sounded behind her. Belle didn't need to turn to know who it was. The scent of sandalwood touched with amber, the same scent she'd caught when he stood beside her in the hall. Julian Blackwood stopped next to her, both hands resting on the railing, looking out over the garden. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Only the soft night wind, leaves whispering, and the steady rhythm of two people breathing in the dark. "Are you all right?" Julian finally asked, his voice low, gentler than it had been when he spoke in the grand hall. Belle was quiet for a moment, turning the question over in her mind. Was she all right? She'd waited 6 years for this. 6 years of hiding, 6 years of enduring, 6 years of swallowing humiliation. And now, when it was over, when the traitor had been exposed, when justice had been carried out, what did she feel? "I've waited 6 years for this moment," Belle said, her voice light as breath. "I imagined it 1,000 times. I dreamed about it every night. I thought when it happened, I'd be happy. I'd feel joy. I'd feel free." She paused, looking down at the red roses in the garden. "But now, I just feel empty." Julian nodded, as if he understood exactly what was inside her. "Revenge never brings happiness," he said slowly. "It only ends a chapter. It doesn't write the next one. It doesn't bring back what you lost. It doesn't raise the dead." Belle turned to look at him, gray-blue eyes meeting dark brown under the moon. "You say that like you've lived it." "I have," Julian replied, his voice distant. "Years ago. But that's another story, for another time." Silence again. For a moment. Then Belle asked, her tone gentle but curious, "Why did you help me? You don't owe me anything. You don't owe my family anything. You could have stayed out of it, like everyone else has for 6 years." Julian didn't answer right away. He stared into the distance, as if searching the night for the truth. Then he spoke, his voice low and unhurried. "6 years ago, I met you at the party at Thornwood Manor." Belle remembered. She remembered the tall, cold man who'd shaken her hand with that strange look in his eyes. "You talked to me about the underworld," Julian continued. "You said you wanted to change it. You said you believed you could do good, even in darkness. You said you wanted to continue your father's work, building schools, hospitals, helping the people who needed help." He turned to her, and his eyes held a warmth Belle had never expected from the coldest boss on the West Coast. "I thought, this is a remarkable woman. This is someone this world needs. And when I heard your family was attacked, I was furious." His voice sank, not because I lost a potential ally, but because the world had lost someone like you. Belle felt her heart beat faster. She didn't know what to say. For 6 years she'd lived like a shadow, unseen, uncared for. And now the most powerful man on the West Coast stood here, telling her he'd remembered her for 6 years. They looked at each other under the moonlight, saying nothing, needing nothing, because in that moment, something warm began to kindle between them, something neither of them dared to name. But both of them could feel. It was late when Belle left Sterling Estate. No, she told herself, not Sterling Estate. It was Thornwood Manor, her family's home, and one day she would take it back. But not tonight. Tonight, she needed to do something else. Camille's car brought her back to the old apartment in Brooklyn, the tiny, shabby place where she'd lived for 6 years. Walt sat in the front seat, silent as always. Camille had gone back to the hotel to rest after a night that had shaken everything, but Walt had insisted on going with Belle. He didn't say why, but Belle understood. He wanted to be with her for this moment, the moment she said goodbye to Beth Sullivan and welcomed Isabel Thornwood back. The stairwell was dark as always. The elevator was broken as always. Belle climbed one step at a time, her white dress brushing over dusty stairs, her high heels tapping a steady rhythm in the quiet night. Walt followed behind her, his pace slower now but still firm. When Belle opened the apartment door, the familiar smell of dampness rushed into her lungs. She turned on the light and looked around the small room. The single bed with its faded sheets, the old wooden table scarred with scratches, the little closet filled with cheap clothes, the window facing a narrow, dark alley. This was everything she'd had for 6 years. This was where she'd cried on nights she couldn't count. This was where she'd swallowed humiliation, endured, fought to survive one day at a time. And this was also the place that had sheltered her, protected her, kept her hidden from the people who wanted her dead. Belle sat down on the bed, the white gown spreading across the worn sheets. She took one last look around the room, and tears began to fall. But these weren't tears of pain. They weren't tears of despair. They were tears of release. 6 years. 6 years she'd lived like a shadow. 6 years she'd hidden, run, abandoned everything she'd once been. And now, at last, she could be herself. At last, she could lift her chin, meet another person's eyes, and say she was Isabel Thornwood. Walt stood by the door, watching her in silence. Then he walked in slowly and sat in the old chair facing the bed. "You did it, miss." His voice had gone rough with emotion. "Your master and mistress can rest now. They can smile wherever they are, because their daughter has brought them justice." Belle looked at Walt, the man who'd sacrificed 6 years of his life to protect her from afar. The man who'd endured with her, stayed silent with her, waited with her. "Thank you, Walt," she said, her voice thick, "for everything, for saving me that night, for staying with me for 6 years, for never giving up on me." Walt smiled, a rare expression on his weathered face. "It was my duty, miss, and it was my honor." Just then, Belle's phone rang. She glanced at the screen. An unknown number, but by instinct, she knew exactly who it was. She answered. "Hello, it's me, Julian." His voice was low and warm through the phone. "I know it's late, but I want to see you." Belle was silent for a moment. Her heart began to beat faster. "About business." "No," Julian replied, his tone gentler than she'd ever heard from him. "Not about business. It's just, I want to see you. That's all." Belle felt her lips curve upward. A smile. For the first time in 6 years, she smiled for real. Not a strained smile to hide pain. Not a polite smile for customers, but a smile from the deepest place in her, the smile of someone who was happy. "I want to see you too," she answered softly. On the other end of the line, she could almost hear Julian smiling. 1 year after that fateful night, everything had changed. On the main street in downtown Seattle, a new building had risen, elegant and modern, its architectural lines soft and graceful. The facade was decorated with stylized images of white roses, and at the top, in large silver letters, were the words Thornwood Foundation. This wasn't a business. This was a nonprofit organization devoted to helping women and children who'd been abused, mistreated, and pushed into desperate circumstances. This was the dream Belle had carried since she was a young girl, the dream she'd shared with Julian at that party 6 years earlier. And now, that dream had become real. Belle stood in her office on the highest floor of the building, looking out over Seattle through a wall of glass. She'd changed so much from a year ago. Her golden hair was cut shorter now, polished and energetic. Her work clothes were refined but never showy, and her gray-blue eyes, those eyes, were no longer shadowed or sad. They shone with hope, with purpose, with the peace she'd searched for through 6 long years. Over the past year, the Thornwood Foundation had helped more than 500 women and children escape dangerous situations. They provided safe housing, legal support, psychological counseling, and job training so women could stand on their own. Every time Belle saw a mother holding her child and smiling after surviving violence, she knew she was doing what her father had always wanted. As for the people who'd harmed her family, their fates had been decided too. Arthur Sterling slowly lost his power in the underworld. After the wedding night, no one wanted to do business with him. Old allies turned their backs. Partners cut ties. The empire he'd built with the Thornwood family's blood was collapsing day by day. He lived in a huge mansion that felt hollow, waking every night from nightmares, flinching at every sound. He was waiting for the final day when justice would come knocking, and that waiting was more terrifying than any punishment. Veronica Sterling, the arrogant bride of that fateful night, now worked as a sales clerk in an ordinary clothing store in the suburbs of Los Angeles. No one recognized her. No one remembered her. Her high society friends vanished as if they'd never existed. She lived in a small apartment, rode the bus to work, and cried alone every night as she remembered the glamorous past she'd lost. She'd learned the most expensive lesson of her life. When you stand on top by stepping on other people, the fall hurts 1,000 times more. And Raymond Crane, the traitor, had disappeared. No one knew where he was. No one asked. No one searched. In the underworld, someone who betrays allies receives the punishment they deserve, and no one wants the details. He'd been erased from history, as if he'd never existed. A gentle knock sounded at the door. Belle turned and smiled when she saw Julian step inside. Over the past year, their relationship had grown from respect into friendship, and from friendship into something deeper that neither of them dared to name. Julian visited her often, sometimes just to sit and drink coffee and talk, sometimes to help with the foundation's work. He was no longer as cold and distant as he'd been. With Belle, he became warmer, softer, as if she'd touched a part of him he'd believed was dead for a long time. "I have something for you," Julian said, stepping closer and holding out a small red velvet box. Belle opened it and stopped breathing. Inside was a ring, her mother's wedding ring, the ring she'd believed had been lost forever in the attack 6 years ago. "How did you find it?" Belle asked, her voice shaking. "The black market," Julian said. "Someone stole it from the house that night and sold it. It took me almost a year to track it down, but I finally got it back." He looked at her, his dark brown eyes warm. "I promised I'd help you reclaim what you lost. This is only the beginning." Belle held the ring, tears streaming down her cheeks. She slipped it onto her finger, feeling the cool metal against her skin, as if her mother were beside her, holding her, telling her everything would be all right. She lifted her gaze to the photograph of her parents hanging on the wall of her office. Edward and Helena Thornwood on their wedding day, young and happy, bright smiles on their faces. "Mom, Dad," Belle whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm home. I kept my promise. I lived worthy of the Thornwood name." And that is Belle's story, Isabel Thornwood's story, the girl who lost everything but never lost herself. This story teaches an important lesson. People can take your home, your money, even your name, but there's one thing no one can touch: who you truly are, the dignity you carry in your heart. A white rose can be trampled, can be crushed into black mud, but it will always bloom again, more beautiful, stronger, more unbreakable than ever. Like Belle, even if life throws you into the deepest pit, even if you endure injustice and pain beyond measure, remember that you can stand back up. You can rise from the ashes like a phoenix. All you have to do is not give up, not lose yourself, and hold on to your faith in justice. If this story touched your heart, please hit the like button to support our channel. Please share this video with your loved ones, with anyone who needs inspiration, with anyone going through a hard season in life. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next moving story every day. We'd truly love to know how you feel about this story. Have you ever lived through moments you thought you couldn't survive? Did you recognize something in Belle's journey? Please leave a comment below and share what's in your heart. We read every comment, and we're grateful for every thought you share with us. We wish everyone watching this video good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace and happiness. Thank you for being with us. Goodbye, and we'll see you in the next video.